Thank you, Carlos, and it is a pleasure for Beyond Conflict, for me personally, and my colleagues to be back at this wonderful campus. I think we were here almost 3 years ago for the first conference on reconciliation, and it was quite an astounding and powerful experience for us to come here and see mostly Cuban Americans here in Miami who are so close to this issue, coming out and listening and opening, I think, not just their minds, but frankly their hearts to the experience of leaders around the world. And I just want to say briefly that Beyond Conflict, which I co-founded with my colleague Wendy Loers, who you'll hear from a little bit later, was founded in 1991. And we were founded in the aftermath of the transition from dictatorship to democracy in Eastern Europe. And as you recall, there were a lot of experts floating into Eastern Europe offering advice. How do you write constitutions? How do you design a new market economy? And we took a much more humble approach, which, as Americans is often difficult. What we said is the leaders of these post-communist countries would probably benefit more from hearing from people who themselves had been through a transition from dictatorship to democracy. And in 1991, there were far fewer examples than we have today. There was Argentina and Chile. There were the struggles in Uruguay and Brazil following those dictatorships. And then, of course, what happened in Spain after Franco and denazification in Germany. And we were lucky to be able to get support and brought together incredible leaders from these countries who came to Europe. We had the meeting in Salzburg, Austria, February of 1992. And we brought people like Václav Havel or Sergei Kovalev, Andrei Sakharov was one of the great dissidents of the Soviet Union, and leaders throughout Latin America, Eastern Europe, and elsewhere. And in the beginning, in the first day, many people said, our situation is so unique. People can't, learn from each other. How can people in even East Germany or Hungary or Poland learn from Argentina or Chile? And as my Argentine friend here would probably laugh, I thought, well, at the end of the day, people don't respond to the legacy of repression with their passport. They respond as humans. And that their shared experience will eventually permeate this sense of difference that these individuals had. And what we found after the first day is that all of a sudden, all these Central and Eastern Europeans started listening and said, we don't have a tradition of compromise. We don't even have a word in Hungarian or Russian for that. Or we struggle, or we are now struggling with what they struggle with. What do you do with all these collaborators? What do you do with people who committed human rights violations? What do you do with these state security files? I mean, how do we manage this? And more fundamentally, how do we know who is really to blame? And so what grew out of a very sort of powerful, but I think a bit of a test conference grew into our organization. And over the last 22 years, 23 years now, it's been very much focused on the very simple approach of shared experience. That we bring together people who have been through these difficult transitions. Former enemies, former combatants, negotiators from different sides, people at different levels who have struggled with change to come and share their experience. And they do it quite humbly. And about 5 years ago, when we were approached by some folks saying, is there anything we could do to help in this issue of reconciliation between Cuba and Cuban Americans, but also between Cuba and the United States as a country, we were a bit humble and said, well, what can we add other than finding people like Veton Suroy or Donna Hicks or others who have spoken? And so we have been very lucky to find Carlos and Rick and others and the people involved, not only in the Cuban study group, but who come to these conferences. Because what you're being challenged by is no fundamentally different what Veton and many others have been challenged by over the years. And I'll just end by saying two things. Carlos mentioned the word inclusion. And over the last 6 weeks, when we look at what's happening in Iraq and now Syria, what did our president say that the Iraqis had to do? They had to build an inclusive government. And if you think beyond the surface of what inclusion means, it's fundamentally about being acknowledged, of feeling safe, of being understood as you see yourself. That is a universal human, not just a desire, it's a requirement of our species. We need to feel safe in the world. And to be acknowledged and to feel safe is about inclusion. It's in our families, it's in our communities, and it's as countries. ISIS could never have gotten the support it did unless it tapped into this deep fear that Sunnis had in Iraq. So when we think of inclusion, it's a universal experience, and it's tied to dignity, which Donna will get to. So with that, I want to thank Carlos, everybody, for coming today. I want to thank our funders, who have been very supportive. And if you haven't seen, we have this book which we brought and made available to everybody called Beyond Conflict. And if it's out, let us know, give us your card, and we'll be happy to send you one. So thank you.